Alrighty, so after the absolute misery that was the last video, I decided to go on the prowl for something a little sillier, a little more comical, and given that every single Yank, his dog, his cat, his pet ferret, or whatever, has asked, I'm going to do a Civil War video. But there is nuance. The American Civil War is many things. For some, it's their entire personality because my ancestors. But there are some absolutely hilarious episodes involved. In July 1863, one such of these episodes occurred on the paddle steamer Idaho under Captain John M. Newcomb as he sailed the Cumberland and Ohio rivers just north of Nashville. In February 1862, the Confederate stronghold in Tennessee, Nashville, fell to the Union forces. But unbeknownst to the Union generals, the Confederacy unleashed a secret biological weapon in the form of one of the most roaring red light districts known to mankind. See, once the soldiers got into the town, they went looking at the many opium dens and brothels for a bit of sporting hanky-panky and some southern hospitality. Naturally, these men looking, upon walking in and hitting up the women with lines such as, "You are the only 10 I see." They got down to business, and so to speak, within short order, every kind of STD known to man and probably a couple of new ones began to speedrun their way through the Union Army. For every Union soldier who fell in battle, at least a dozen more would be laid up with some kind of infection, all linked to the region known as Smoky Row. As July 1863 rolled around, the commander of the Union forces in the region, Brigadier General Robert S. Granger, had enough of the bonkademic. After pulling out his best anti-horny device, he gave the order that the city would have to be purged of all ladies of the night. Granger gave this job to Provost Marshal Lieutenant Colonel George Spaulding, and he was given the task of seizing all the city's prostitutes and transporting them upriver to Louisville in Kentucky. Spaulding went on the hunt for a boat, and unfortunately for John Newcomb, he found the Idaho, bobbing around and thought, alright, this works, and set to stocking the boat with as many ladies as possible, much to the protest of the relatively new steamer's captain, who was conscripted into this role. But how do you tell a sex worker from, well, not a sex worker? Yeah, it's a bit more complicated than you might think. There's no big sign that's on someone's head going, I am indeed an sex worker. Spaulding also had to contend with his men sampling the wares before a seizure, which made the STD problem even worse. But all throughout Nashville, women began to be seized, some caught totally by surprise, some hiking up their frocks and being chased, and some actually climbing up drain pipes to get away, and some being forced into the back of paddy wagons at the tips of bayonets. There were a few cases of women slapping the ever-loving shit out of the soldiers as they were taken to the dock as well. It kind of was just kidnapping. There's no two ways about it. They were just kidnapping women off the street. Ladies who weren't even remotely involved in sex work, just walking past on the way to ye olde Walmart and Sons or whatever, were also rounded up because, you can't actually tell the difference here. Anyway, all the ladies were thrown onto the Idaho, which was probably then nicknamed the Floating Whorehouse by everyone around it, without any medical supplies, food, or guards. Newcomb was ordered to sail to Louisville. However, nobody actually told anybody in Louisville he was coming, and when they did, nobody bothered to tell Newcomb that Louisville wasn't exactly prepared to accept his cargo. The Idaho began slapping its way upriver. It's a paddle steamer. That's what they do. That's how they move. They slap around the river. And it crossed the Kentucky border near Linton, joining the Ohio River near Smithland. This journey was about 100 or so miles. Newcomb likely thought that this would be the end of his issues, given the voyage had quite literally been torture. Naturally, when you kidnap between 110 to 150 or so women, sources differ, off the street, said women aren't entirely pleased, and, well, they truly made this displeasure known to their captain. Some actually, while taking a break from yelling at the captain, decided to just tear apart the inside of the Idaho to really get the message across. Newcomb tried his best, and to his absolute credit, he did what he could for more than half of his passengers who were laid up in bed sick, spending his own funds to pay for medicine and food as the boat headed upriver. Newcomb repeatedly asked over and over for help from the towns he passed, but he was met with guards telling him to bugger off in the nicest possible way. Newcomb's unwilling passengers came into their own here. jauntily showing off some extra shoulder or perhaps an ankle or two in a scandalous fashion to distract the guards and passers-by. In Louisville, the city officials flat out said no, we are not taking up to 150 additional sex workers who apparently were spreading venereal diseases, take them to Cincinnati instead. But on the plus side, Louisville did provide Newcomb with some guards to restore order on board. These guards promptly spent the entire journey getting bonked 6 ways from Sunday in a death by schnoo. Newcomb would find himself, like in the tale of the Flying Dutchman, doomed to roam the seas, rivers, forever with no hope at all of a safe haven, as news of his voyage spread like wildfire down the river, with the more Puritan of leaders in towns organising armed guards to repel the dastardly invasion from the south. In defiance against their orders, men began to row out, heroically preparing to board the invader to drive them away, sacrificing their bodies and putting themselves on the line, forcing Newcomb's crew to repel all boarders. The city of Cincinnati by now quite literally had a blockade, dedicated to stopping the boat full of sex workers from pulling into the port, with the prevailing message being, "You are not making Nashville's problem our problem." Newcomb had really no idea what to do, so he decided to contact Washington for some advice. After a little bit of back and forward, Newcomb actually managed to get into contract with, of all people, the Secretary of War Stanton, about the little predicament that he found himself in. Now, it was 1863. Things were, as the kids say, totally popping off in the Civil War, with Gettysburg occurring earlier that month. And naturally, the Secretary of War was more than a little preoccupied upon getting a telegram from a captain saying one of his generals had cocked up by making a USS sex bonk machine, and he wasn't entirely pleased. Stanton decided very quickly that the blame would then fall on Granger, because, he had taken the whole idea of, hey, maybe stop having men get STDs to the next level, and gone a bit too far by organising a mass kidnapping campaign. Stanton ordered the boat back down the river to Nashville, sending the ladies home after their all-expenses-paid trip, by Newcomb, not by the government, totally unwilling river crews, and Stanton made it very, very clear to Granger that if he closed the port to the Idaho, then he would be looking for another job. This whole event, it took place over about 13 days, and 13 days after he left, Newcomb found himself pulling into the dock where he left from, with his cargo still aboard. What was somewhat worse for the wear, and in short order, they disembarked and sauntered their way back to Old Smoky Row and continued their services. But what about the disease? So you'd think it'd all come back. You might find it hard to believe, but there was actually a really good positive to come from this little event. See, the powers that be in Washington were now actually acutely aware of the dangers of disease from sexual bonking, and what it can do to an army at war, particularly an army engaged in occupation. The solution in hindsight was simple, and it was to legalise prostitution, but only if the women submitted to medical checks and got a licence, and they would be therefore known as public women, to work in Nashville. They would also have to undergo weekly physical examinations by an Army-approved medical practitioner for the fee of around 50 cents per visit, with those sick sent to military hospital to recover. If a soldier was then found soliciting the horizontal tango from an unlicensed prostitute, or if a woman was found working without a licence, they were slammed for 30 days in prison, no questions asked. Sorry, but all I can think of in my head is, you got a licence for that! All the jokes that Americans like to make to Britain. At the end of the day, this program cost the federal government about $6,000 at the time, and it made about $5,900 in return. This is before you account for the bonuses and the fact that half the army wasn't sick anymore. So, they don't have to pay for medical care for half the army anymore because half the army is not getting STDs from every 6 directions. This is actually, interestingly, one of the first examples of public health care in the US, and clearly it's indicative that the evil North was nothing more than a communist utopia, and the South shall rise again as the true bastion of... Wait, hang on, no, that's half of my detractors, that's what they think. We'll just continue on. Anyway, sanity returned, and this little approach was revolutionary. The army loved it, the workers loved it, the clients loved it, the commanders loved it because the disease numbers dropped. It was a win-win-win all round. Unless, of course, you were Captain Newcomb, who really drew the short end of the stick here. See, our little erstwhile hero was told that the damages to his vessel and sanity were not at all service-related, and he actually struggled for quite a while to get compensation for his own funds that were used to keep the women aboard alive, to avoid a mass death at sea, well, death on the river, and taken care of medicinally. He also carried a severe stigma for the rest of his life, being known as the captain of the whorehouse. The poor Idaho kept this stigma too, being nothing more than the butt of jokes as she plied her way up and down the rivers of the central United States into the post-war era. So the thing is about the Idaho is, once it made its way back into port, how should we say, you wouldn't want to go near the mattresses that were on the boat. You really wouldn't want to go near them. You also might not want to go into the bathrooms. And you might want to keep any kind of UV light out of the boat. We'll leave it there, but it wasn't in the best of shape after the war. Or after this little 13-day pleasure cruise. And personally, I wouldn't want to go on it without washing my hands a lot. And maybe wearing a full, one of those COVID outfits that you saw on TV where, everyone's completely covered in plastic. Just don't go on the Idaho. It's probably not worth it. That thing should have been burnt. Newcomb and the Idaho paid a very high price for their service in this relatively unknown and funny bit of history that, comically enough, made some extreme strides in the rights of ladies of the night and the rights to public healthcare within the United States. Thank you for your service. And thank you for joining me on this fun little adventure, something a bit more fun after the absolute horror and misery of my last video, which, if you haven't seen it, it's pretty miserable. So just giving you a heads up there. It's all about the Holodomor, so I appreciate all those who have watched, all the feedback I've received. It's been phenomenal. I can't thank you all enough. Thank you to all the patrons, particularly the new ones who joined just to make themselves go out of the way to watch the uncensored version. I greatly appreciate your effort to educate yourself on a topic that's really forgotten. Also, one more thing, I've started a merchandise store, and you can buy our Tsushima Cruise Line's bit of merchandise, this lovely bit of art that has now gone public. I have got one on my desk here. I will include a photo of it. It's on my stack of books. But yes, Tsushima Cruise Line's now open for business. I will include a link to it in the description, and I will start including it in all my descriptions going forward. So thank you all again. Like, comment, subscribe. I will catch you all next time. And there, are you happy? You got your Civil War video. Stop asking now, or I'll do it on something even stupider.